Welcome, everybody. Thanks for your patience. Teams was being difficult, which is like kind of Teams job description, is it not? So I am really happy to welcome you to the very first in a new seminar series, the CBS Community Seminar Series. And this was something that was actually started as an idea in the MCB EDI committee and was basically developed into something that is a college-wide program. And the whole idea is that twice a year, so once in the fall and once in the winter, one of the departmental EDI committees hosts a speaker that would be of interest to the whole college to discuss some aspect of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so the idea is that this is a chance a couple times a year for us to get together at the college level and basically talk about EDI issues because we have a lot happening at the department level, but not a whole lot officially happening at the college level. So I am very happy today, after a short technical delay, to introduce the very first speaker in this series, Dr. Kelsey Byers. Dr. Byers is currently a group leader at the John Innes Center in the UK. She studies mostly the evolution of floral scent these days. But in addition, she is well known for her EDI work, including giving talks like this on her experience being a disabled scientist, leading the Slack Worldwide Disabled Scientists Slack workspace. She is one of the heads of the diversity committee of the Society for the Study of Evolution, which is a society that we're both members of. And in addition, she was co-author on a paper that was published in the American Naturalist last year about basically the use of ableist language in evolutionary biology and some of the implications of that. And that paper managed to get basically a reaction on Twitter from both Richard Dawkins and Elon Musk, which can I say is quite a feather in her cap. So we are really happy to have her here today speaking. She's also going to be giving a departmental and IB seminar tomorrow at 11:30 on some of her floral scent work, and she's going to be here through midday on Wednesday meeting with people. And so with that, I would like to just hand it over to Kelsey.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? The sound is working. Sounds like the sound is working online as well now, which is awesome. So I'm going to talk to you about being disabled in the fields, navigating nature and academia as a disabled scientist. Thanks very much for the really kind invite. It's so great to be here, even if it is colder than it is in the UK and actually a bit wetter as well, I have to say. The snow is very exciting. I know the snow is probably boring for most folks here, but coming from the UK, it's very nice to see. So my contact info is on the slide, as well as a photo of me sitting in my wheelchair. And for those of you who are joining online, I'm sitting currently in a wheelchair. I'm wearing a shirt that says, "This is my freedom," with a picture of a wheelchair that looks a lot like mine, and a pair of rainbow colored socks. And the reasons for the shirt and the socks will probably become evident throughout the talk. My contact info is below, and I'll show it again at the end as well. So feel free to reach out if you have questions that you maybe don't want to ask in a large public forum. Do reach out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about me and how I identify, because I think it's important when we give these talks to explain where we're coming from as speakers. Some basic concepts about disability. You've probably heard about disability before. I mean, everyone's seen the sign on the toilet that says this is an accessible toilet, but what is disability actually? How disability works in the fieldwork setting, which is something I'm particularly interested in, and disability in other sometimes difficult settings in our work. And finally, a summary and some take-home points that you can use to increase inclusion in your labs and in your departments. So we'll start with identity. So as Chris kindly said, I'm a group leader at the John Innes Center in Norwich in the UK. As you can tell from my accent, I am not from the UK originally. I actually grew up west of Boston, so this feels like home to me when I see the trees, the squirrels, the chickadees. My research is on plant pollinator interactions and floral scents. And I'm from a family of scientists. So 2/3 of my parents were in academia. I have a step parent, that's why I say 3. 2 of them were in academia, all had advanced degrees, all were in science careers. And the reason I want to point that out in particular is that this is an area of privilege we often don't think about. I grew up knowing from a very young age that I could be an assistant professor or a group leader, that grant money was something you had to apply for, that you had to get papers through peer review. This was discussed at the dinner table. And if you come from a family where academia is not a known career path, you may not have understood any of these things, or even known that graduate school was an option, or even known that undergraduate was an option, right? And so I want to call that out as a really important aspect of privilege that I haven't had to struggle with. I identify as multiply disabled, and I'll explain that in a minute. I am agender. You can use any pronouns. I'm not fussed. Assigned female at birth and trans. I'm also asexual, and that will come up in an intersectionality slide in a little bit. But I want to acknowledge that I'm also carrying a lot of privilege. I come from a global North country. I'm financially well off. My parents are in academia, etc. And even though I am myself an immigrant right now in the United Kingdom, I'm a documented immigrant, and that makes a really big difference. So let's talk about disability now that I've sort of spieled about my life for a few seconds. What do I actually mean when I say disabled? So there are legal definitions of disability and there are common definitions of disability, but most of them talk about physical or mental impairments and abilities to do normal daily activities. So normal daily activities might be things like walking down to get the post, or washing dishes, preparing dinner. These are mostly centered around the home, but also center around your ability to have a career and work in your chosen field or study. The definitions legally are usually pretty similar. So the UK Equality Act is pretty similar to the Americans with Disabilities Act, although it came quite a bit later. I looked at the laws in Canada and I was absolutely shocked to find out there is not actually a federal law that talks specifically about disability, right? So there's a law that's similar to the Equalities Act that says that we should treat people equally, but there's no strong federal law that protects the rights of people with disabilities specifically. It sounds like Ontario is further ahead than some of the other provinces around that. On a Slack that I'm on, someone has been asking about employment protection in Quebec, and the answer is there's no info out there, good luck, right? So it really does depend. I also want to acknowledge that people with chronic illnesses, deaf folks, and neurodivergent folks don't always identify as disabled, but they are entitled to the same legal protections if their particular conditions rise to the level of impairment that qualifies as a disability. And I'm using qualifies in scare quotes here because really you shouldn't have to qualify. Disability has a very gatekeepery kind of aspect where you have to fill out paperwork and apply for stuff, and that really shouldn't be the case. And for me, I say multiply disabled because I have multiple conditions. So I'm in a wheelchair, obviously, that makes me visibly disabled, but I also have other conditions that you can't see, like I have ADHD and I'm autistic, and those impact me in many ways just as much as using a wheelchair does. So why do I say that I'm a disabled scientist instead of a scientist with disabilities? So many people have been told that they should use what's called person-first language rather than identity-first language. So you should say a person with blindness rather than a blind person. And this really depends on who you ask and the specific disability community and also what part of the world you're in. So identity-first language is more common in the United Kingdom and less common, for example, in the US. Autistic folks tend to prefer identity-first language. People who work with autistic folks often use person-first language. On the other hand, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities often prefer person-first language to emphasize that they are people whose rights need to be respected. For me in particular, I say that I say a disabled person or that I'm a disabled scientist because my disability colors every aspect of my life experience. It is there from the time that I wake up in the morning to the time that I wake up in the middle of the night and can't sleep, to trying to get on the bus in the morning, to trying to get in the door at work, right? But it's really important to respect an individual's preferred terminology. If they want you to use a specific terminology, that is what you should use for them. So models of disability, there is so much work in disability studies on this. So I'm going to present to you just a couple of really quick models. The model most people have heard of on the street is what we call the medical model. It's a deficit model. It asks, what is wrong with you? How do we fix you? So this is, for example, the paraplegic person in a wheelchair who gets told by their doctor, well, we have a life-saving surgery that will be able to correct your spinal deformity. And it's like, okay, but does this person need to be fixed? What is their lived experience? The social model, on the other hand, says that disability is imposed by social structures. So, for example, the fact that when I got to the rail station in Mount Pleasant yesterday and found that the lift was broken between the platforms, I needed someone to carry my wheelchair up the stairs with me. The social model says, well, that's not my fault that I needed to carry the wheelchair up the stairs. That's the fault of only having one elevator in the station that happened to break, right? So society and infrastructure are what need fixing. I personally prefer the biopsychosocial model, which is what the World Health Organization uses, because even if society is perfectly inclusive, I still struggle with daily life. I'm tired all the time. I'm in a lot of pain all the time. And even if life is perfectly well adjusted to me, I still have to deal with that. But there's a lot more models. You can look at disability studies literature to your heart's content. It is a fully developed field, so feel free to explore. I want to talk about invisibility because this is something that's becoming more apparent to people. So how many people here have heard of like the sunflower lanyards, the green lanyard with the sunflowers on? We got a couple of raised hands. That's awesome. So I was really excited to see these in the United Kingdom as well. They're becoming more prevalent worldwide. And I'm showing you a series of pictures here of me standing against a wall in a house and asking you, am I disabled? In the first picture, I'm just standing there. I'm wearing jeans and a shirt, nothing obvious going on. And in the second picture, it's me again, but I'm wearing a variety of braces on my joints. So I've got wrist braces, knee braces, ankle braces, a brace around my hips. Am I disabled now? What about now? It's the same picture, but I'm also using crutches. Does this count? Because for many people, they see someone on crutches and they go, oh, you just sprained your ankle, you're not actually disabled. But many people use crutches lifelong. Well, now I'm in a wheelchair, and this is where almost everyone would say your age combined with the fact that you're in a wheelchair means you're definitely disabled. You count as a disabled person. Disability exists even if you can't see it. Probably approximately, I don't know how many people in the room right now, say there's 60 of us in the room. Probably at least 10 of the people in this room right now have a legally defined disability. They may not know it, they may not acknowledge it, and that is fine. But I want you to know that it's not the minority of people you see using wheelchairs who are the only disabled people out there. It is a lot of your peers and colleagues. And this is why inclusion is so important. So why don't people talk about their disabilities in public? I do because it's very obvious. I have a visible disability. I use a wheelchair. But a lot of people don't want to tell the world about their situation, right? And this could include not telling your PhD supervisor. It could include, if you're faculty, not telling your head of departments. Not telling people leading a field team or your group leaders or the people teaching your courses. It's really important as a result to not solicit specific information from people based on what you perceive as whether they're disabled or not. It's really important to solicit information from everybody to ask, not just, are you disabled? Don't ask that. Instead, ask, what can I do to make your experience, for example, in my research placement, more productive, more welcoming, more functional for you? And people will tell you things in this instance that they might not have told you if you just said, are you disabled? Because the point is we're trying to make it a better environment for everyone. You don't have to be someone who considers themselves disabled to benefit from inclusion, right? It's also really important that privacy is available for these kinds of conversations and that privacy is available for people who need to take medication. Do you know how awkward it is to be on a transatlantic flight home and pull out your medications and take like 10 pills and have the people next to you stare at you? It's really awkward. And so people need privacy to have these conversations, to do things that they need to do medically. The privacy and stigma are really big deals because a lot of disabling conditions are still heavily stigmatized, especially conditions like mental health conditions, especially conditions like autism, right? Stigma is a big deal still. So I mentioned intersectionality at the very beginning. So this is a term that was coined by Kimberly Williams Crenshaw in 1989 to address the non-additive effects of her life as a Black woman. It's not that she is a Black person plus she is a woman. She is a Black woman. The two experiences cannot be separated, and they both color her lived experience. I'm not a person who's white and also disabled and also queer. I am a white disabled queer person. I am in some ways the intersection of those different identities. You can't separate them because they color everything. As a white disabled person, I have more privilege, for example, than a disabled person of color in many instances. As a queer disabled person, I have less privilege than a person who is a cis straight disabled person, right? So these intersect. So I'm an intersectional human being. Yay! We're all intersectional to some degree, right? The issues that I've run into, hilariously, is that society says that I'm an asexual person, which means I don't have sexual attraction to other people, because I'm disabled, because disabled people don't do that, right? Disabled people are seen as children. They don't have interest in sexual relationships, etc. The disability rights movement, on the other hand, says that I'm asexual because I have what's called internalized ableism, where I'm letting society interpret for me how I should be as a human being. And I'm letting myself fall into a trap where I'm just letting society determine that. Well, that's not the case. I'm asexual and it has nothing to do with my disabilities in my case. But gender, on the other hand, is really strongly correlated with both ADHD and autism. The prevalence of transgender identities among autistic individuals is substantially higher than among the regular population. And so this is another case where there is intersectionality going on. And you also run into issues where, for example, you're at a conference and there's a queer-friendly, let's go hang out at a bar. To have a social hour. We found the queer bar in town. It's great. Oh, the queer bar is not accessible. So because you're queer and disabled, you can't do that. Or some disability-friendly spaces are not queer-friendly. Intersectionality colors everything. So what do I actually mean when I say that disability colors everything? So I'm going to tell you about some actual comments and barriers and things I've run into in daily life. And this is a painful section, right? I'm sharing with you things that sound like they're going to hurt a bit. And I want to do that because you need to understand that being a minoritized individual is not all roses. And that in real life, people actually do say things that are really not great. So I've had colleagues say, as someone who can walk a little bit, I've had colleagues say, it's so good to see you out of your wheelchair. Well, the problem with this is it implies that being in the wheelchair is bad and walking is good. And the opposite is actually true for me. The day that this happened, on one instance, I was going to the dentist, which was inaccessible, and so I had to use my canes that day. And the guy said, it was so great to see you out of your wheelchair. You must be doing better. My wheelchair makes me feel better. I don't feel like I'm going to faint all the time when I'm in my chair. I felt horrible that day. And I felt uncomfortable, but also my colleagues who work with me, they also felt uncomfortable because they know the effect that being in my chair has on my well-being. So remember that these comments don't just affect the target person, they affect the other people around as well. Colleagues I don't know well have asked me, why do you use a wheelchair? As though they have a right to understand my personal information. It's not a question that bothers me from close colleagues or friends or people I've known a long time, but from people that I just know by name, it's like, why do you feel entitled to my personal information? And for me, for historical reasons, I feel like my own right to privacy is less valuable than other people's curiosity, and that's something that I have to carry. And so wouldn't it be nice if people didn't ask? You can walk? Oh my God. People who've only seen me in my chair sometimes say this. They're shocked. I'm not a miracle. Many disabled people who use wheelchairs can walk a little bit. And again, it's this discomfort, it's this distrust. It's how do you address these colleagues in the future? They've shown themselves from the first interaction to just be kind of uncomfortable to be around. And you don't want to be uncomfortable at work. You look like you're ready for a hike. Colleagues seeing me with a stuffed backpack or rucksack, which I have on my back right now, sometimes with crutches or canes. Most of my backpack is medically important supplies. It's also rude. Like if you had a colleague who was wearing, for example, a religious headgear or headwear item, you wouldn't ask them, oh, why are you wearing that? You might comment and say, oh, I really like your hijab today. I think the scarf is really beautiful. But you wouldn't just be like, well, oh, why are you wearing that thing? You don't need to comment on things in a rude fashion, right? I laugh, but I feel uncomfortable inside because, again, you're invading my privacy. You're making fun of a way in which I'm different from other people. Even if it's subtle and it doesn't sound like it's rude, it is. I once had a very uncomfortable experience as well. I gave a seminar at work on a raised stage, which had a ramp going down. And these two colleagues came up to me before my seminar and said, how are you going to get down from the stage? I was already on the stage, so I clearly could get on the stage. I was using my wheelchair. And they said, how are you going to get down? And I said, I'm going to use the ramp. But the ramp is so steep and it's just got a little lip. Aren't you worried you're going to fall? No, I've done this before. It's fine. And so when I got down safely after the Q&A, after my science talk, they clapped and applauded me for getting off the stage safely. I am not a circus act. I am not here for your entertainment. I'm not at risk of horrible consequences for using a wheelchair. It's not a bad thing. And the other thing is, as a scientist, this distracted from the actual science I was presenting. It reduced my identity from science disabled person to just disabled person. And again, I don't want to interact with these colleagues anymore, which is a pity because they're in my research field. I don't want to collaborate with them because I can't trust them. What a horrible feeling. Physical access. The glass houses are still inaccessible after 3 years of me being in my current position. I have to get out of my wheelchair, walk up to the door, drag my wheelchair behind me like a cart. And then once I'm in the door, I get back in the wheelchair. And this is annoying. Because I can walk a little bit, it's not insurmountable. But a colleague who wouldn't be able to walk wouldn't be able to use the glass houses at all without having an accompanying person. But the big issue is the horticulture services director has said he'll fix it every 2 months when I ask him, and he said this for 3 years. And it's that breakdown of trust and that discomfort. You don't want to have a lack of trust and discomfort in a work environment. It's just not productive. And the other issue is language. So you've probably heard about the importance of language and the fact that we still have terms in daily use that are actually offensive. In the UK, we use terms like manic, which refers more specifically to a bipolar mood episode type. But oh, my schedule is so manic this week. No, I'm sorry, I'm bipolar. It's not the same thing. Me thinking I'm the Buddha and hallucinating is not the same thing as you having a really packed schedule today. Or they use the term mad. It's so mad this is happening. It's not mad. It's just stressful. It's just unusual. It's just a little much. Other common terms that we use, especially I want to call it this one, double-blind peer review. This is not a good term because you're not actually a blind person who's trying to review a paper unless you might be yourself. Why not use the term double anonymous, which is actually what the term actually means. Crippled by, wheelchair bound. As you can see, I'm not tied to my wheelchair physically. It lets me get around. It let me go to Toronto yesterday. Blind to things, deaf to things, crazy, etc. These are all terms that we use in daily use, but they're all terms that are problematic. We need to phase them out. The other thing I wanted to call out is there's a big issue in members of many different historically excluded groups and currently excluded groups, which is fatigue and burnout. This stems from multiple factors, one of which is trying to survive in a world that is not made for you. If you are a person of color and you're trying to survive in a world that is built for white people, it takes extra effort. There's also the issue that people want you to do DEI work. If you're a visible minority, they're like, please join the committee, it'll be great. Not all committees are like this, but many of them are. If you are the only woman in a department full of men, you might be asked to join every committee so that every single committee at least has a woman on it, right? There's also the issue of you're expected to do activism. Wait, you are a gay person, but you don't want to march in Pride? Come on, don't you want to protest? It's in a part of your identity. Well, maybe that's not something that person feels the need to do. And also the need to educate privileged group members. Oh, what's it like being Black? What's it like being Muslim? Well, how about if you just go and read on the internet some information, and then maybe you can come back and ask some more targeted, interesting questions if the person's open to talking about them, right? Disability has the other two issues as well. We have access fatigue, the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, there's this problem of constantly struggling to fill out paperwork just to get in the physical door, getting in the glass house door. I'm tired every time I get in that glass house because I have to haul my wheelchair behind me. But also the fact that my disabilities cause physical and mental fatigue on top of this. So I refer to this as double or triple fatigue or burnout. But I want you to remember that this fatigue and burnout is common to almost all people in historically excluded groups. It's not just people with disabilities. Fatigue and burnout are part of our daily lives. I also wanted to call it intent versus impact, and this is because of some things that I've run into in my work environment. So many people in historically excluded groups will use the phrase intent isn't magic, which is a shorthand for just because you meant well when you said that or did that, it doesn't mean you didn't hurt someone. And it doesn't mean it was okay. Your intent to just make a funny joke doesn't excuse the fact that the person you told the joke to really hurt inside. Many people then feel the need to ask, well, why were you hurt? You have to justify why you were hurt. It's not enough to just say, that comment hurt me. So case study, we had a speaker who came to an internal conference who was an external speaker. He made some racist comments, which was really awkward. But the intent wasn't clear. And so multiple people who would call themselves allies said, well, it's not a big deal because he clearly didn't mean it that way. Whereas everyone I know in that room who was a member of a historically excluded group, even those who are not people of color, were like, oh my God, what did he just say? That's so bad. Then he also said that his plants were autistic. What he meant was they had stereotype development, and that's not the same as autism, and also plants cannot be autistic because they don't have theory of mind. But he said it was probably rude to say that beforehand, so everyone agreed that that was clearly not okay, because he knew he was being bad. But the issue of the injury to people who heard these words and the future steps forward were controversial even at a DEI committee meeting, which was horrible to experience. Because I'm sitting there going, these comments literally hurt me. And I heard people saying, well, it's not a big deal. And raising these issues is very sensitive because it typecasts the person who's a minoritized individual as being overly sensitive or too emotional. You need to calm down. It's not all about you. It's not aimed at you. Well, it is. So I want to talk a little bit about meritocracy. So this is a paper that was published in the Journal of Controversial Ideas, which already tells you something about the subject of the paper. And I'm not going to read the whole quote, but they're basically like, merit-based science is truly fair and inclusive. Well, that's a nice ideal, right? We shouldn't dismantle science just because a few individuals are clearly being excluded. And anyway, claims of bias in STEM, which now pervade the literature as though it were a virus, are typically based on anecdotal evidence, superficial analyses, or ideology. And I'm sure you've all heard these arguments from people before. Oh, it's just a few individuals, it's no big deal. Well, if you're one of those individuals who's been excluded, it really matters because it's your life. I'm going to show you some actual stats that are going to show you that the bias is actually real. It's not just some anecdotal evidence, TM. The thing is, meritocracy is a very attractive idea at its heart, but we don't have a meritocracy in STEM right now, and we don't have a meritocracy in any field right now. And therefore, we don't have merit-based science, and therefore arguments trying to uphold merit-based science are based on a false premise. And the problem is this view is very open and shut. Many people think that DEI work is trying to completely dismantle the system, when what it's trying to do is raise everyone up so that everyone can benefit. We're not trying to burn the house down. We're just trying to put out a couple of the fires. So disability and diversity. How many people here, and you don't have to raise your hands, I just want you to think, have thought about disability as an aspect of diversity? When you've read those job ads and you've seen we're an equal opportunity employer, we support women and people of color and veterans. Where's disability? Sometimes they don't even include it. Sometimes this is because disability is seen as a different category of being a minoritized individual. It's a legal or privacy-based thing. It's not an identity-based thing. This is a really common view, especially in the US. But more often it's because people just assume that you can't even do the work. So what's the point in talking about you at all? Because you're disabled, you just won't be able to do it at all. I mean, we see the same thing in views about women. We see the same thing in views about people of color, that they're less competent. This assumption is so dangerous. The result is, for disability in particular, we see few scholarships, grants, DEI efforts that are made with disability in mind. There are exceptions, which are wonderful. And the end result is that we see low participation of disabled folks in STEM. When I was a graduate student, every disabled undergrad I met was in the disability studies program because that was the place they felt at home, and they didn't feel at home anywhere else. Where were the disabled medical school students? Oh, right, doctors can't be disabled. The programs are really hard to deal with if you're disabled. You get tired, we don't have the support, we don't have the mentorship. I got assigned a mentor. It took them a year to find me a mentor when I was in graduate school through this worldwide mentoring program online, who was disabled at all. And his disability was so different from mine that he literally had almost nothing that he could say that would share my experiences. We're just not there. And there's also these constant access battles. It is so exhausting to have to prove to every new faculty member, to every new head of department, to every new HR and occupational health department that you really are disabled. And yes, you need the accommodations, and you're not asking for extra love. You're just asking to get in the door. So some stats. I said I would show you evidence. In the UK, 5% of higher education staff have a declared disability. This is in contrast to about 20% of working adults. 3 out of 4 of us are missing from higher ed. And in the US, a study of evolutionary biologists that was done by Rushworth et al., a close friend of mine and a close friend of Chris's as well, showed that 11% of evolutionary biologists declared a disability on an anonymous study versus 26% of the US population. We are literally missing. And this is true also of many other marginalized groups. Evolutionary biology in particular, unfortunately, is quite unwelcoming to folks of color, to folks who are socioeconomically less privileged, to folks who are disabled. Here's some stats. Again, it turns out if you're disabled, you're less likely to get grants in the US from the National Institutes of Health, which is the biggest funder of biological sciences research. Your success rate is lower, and also the percentage of people reporting disabilities has actually declined over time. This number should have increased, you would think, with increasing legal protections, increasing awareness, and so on, but it's actually gone down. People are leaving because there is not a place for them. And it's not just me, and it's not just the stats. Upchurch and Van wrote in a Royal Society blog post that there are still considerable barriers. It is very unusual for us to meet other colleagues with disabilities. This is probably because people are reluctant to disclose because stigma, mental health issues, etc. Barriers, but especially assumptions that we are less competent researchers. And therefore we just don't exist. And therefore we can't exist. So a final thought in this section, what are we actually being paid for as scientists? Are we being paid to pipette, or are we being paid to think? Because in a lot of places, people are excluded because they can't do the manual tasks associated with science. But actually, if you want to do independent research, we're being paid to think. So why not hire someone to do the pipetting if that's an accommodation that you need? Lab work is often inherently inaccessible. It doesn't need to be. You can make lab work accessible. Office work is easier to make accessible, but this can actually be a trap. I had a friend who's blind, totally blind, and he wanted to be a biologist. And his college career counselor said, you can't be a biologist, you're totally blind, you can't work in the lab. You're better off doing bioinformatics. Just stay in the office, use a computer. That was his dream for his life. Why not make that possible? Fieldwork, on the other hand, many of us think is not possible at all if you're in a wheelchair. It is. You just have to be creative. So let's talk a little bit about fieldwork in particular. Here is Google Images for fieldwork a couple of years ago. And you see many photos of almost predominantly white, I want to call that out, folks who are in mountains, they're crossing streams, they're in the forest, most of them are standing up, few of them are sitting, they're hiking, they're in remote and inhospitable environments, they're in Antarctica. What happens if you Google for fieldwork disability? You see very few photos of people actually in the field. You see a lot of papers. You see a lot of diagrams. You see a few photos of people actually out in the fields. 2 of these photos are of me, which is especially embarrassing. I should not be the only person talking about disabled fieldwork, and yet. So which of these people is a field biologist? These are 3 photos of me. On the left, I'm carrying a heavy backpack in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. In the middle, I'm drinking tea, which reminds me I should have something to drink to wet my throat. I'm drinking tea in my office in Switzerland. And then the right, I'm sitting in my wheelchair with my binoculars around my neck in my partner's family backyard. Which of these people is a field biologist? Most people, if asked, would say the first person is clearly a field biologist, right? They're out with a heavy pack, they're in the mountains, they're hiking, they're clearly in the field. When that photo was taken, I had never done fieldwork in my life. That photo was taken the summer before I started my PhD. I had just seen my study organism for my PhD for the first time in the field, and I was so excited. I took a blurry photo. I knew it was my organism. I didn't know anything else. In the right-hand photo, I've done fieldwork in 4 different countries. I've lived in the tropics for multiple months at a time doing fieldwork with butterflies. I've explored in various places. I've interacted in places where I didn't speak the language. I've planned fieldwork expeditions and led them. But I'm in a wheelchair, so many people assume I don't do the fieldwork at all. Fieldwork is often treated as an optional or a special case, but it could be a fundamental part of your research. If it's a big part of your PhD project, you're a fieldwork biologist, right? Or you get told you can't do fieldwork because we assume you can't do it at all. Or it's a risk management or liability issue. We can't let you in the field because if you get hurt, you might sue us. Fieldwork is often modifiable with a little creativity and a lot of communication and thinking ahead. I do want to acknowledge that there are situations in which fieldwork may not be possible for everyone. If you are hiking across glaciers in Antarctica and you cannot walk, this may not be possible for you. But that is not the majority of fieldwork, and that is not the majority of situations, and that is not the majority of people. So being creative and not assuming is really critical. So this is a figure from Demery and Pipkin, and it's a deaf woman who's also a woman of color, and she's standing collecting samples in the fields. And she's saying, "Eek, I can't hear, why me?" While a silhouette of a man, a member of the public presumably, is screaming at her and swearing at her. And she's in danger because she's deaf, because she can't hear what he's saying. But she's also in danger because she's a woman, and she's in danger because she's a person of color. Again, it's this intersectionality, right? So we face actual threats in the field. I want to acknowledge that sometimes there are environmental threats. I cannot run away from cows at speed. That is a threat that is unique to me. Someone else might be able to. I also personally don't go into the field alone because I'm at risk of fainting, and that's just a reality of my life, right? I probably shouldn't be in the field by myself. But you probably shouldn't be in the field by yourself anyway, right? For safety reasons, it's better to have a team. There's also communication. If you have a relevant disability, if you're deaf, for example, either culturally, capital D deaf, or hard of hearing, lowercase d deaf, or if you're non-speaking or non-verbal, you might not be able to communicate with the public or with authorities if they come up to you and demand a copy of your research permit. But this is also true if you don't speak the language anyway. And yet we let people go into foreign countries for fieldwork all the time. So what's the issue? And there's the biggest barrier for me is the assumption of competence, people just assuming you can't do the work. So instead, I want you to ask, what are the fundamental tasks involved in the fieldwork? Does everyone have to do every task? What other factors can you modify? Is it a site you can drive to? I know hiking is fun, but could we drive there instead? Or can we stay at a guest house so the person can sleep on a bed and get good night's rest rather than sleeping in a tent? But most importantly, how does that person's individual disability affect their ability to do those fundamental tasks? Not just, oh, I see you're in a wheelchair, so you can't walk and therefore you can't do it. But hey, are you going to be able to do this? What can we do accommodation-wise to make it possible? So 2 quick case studies. One is me in the rainforests of Panama. I was working on heliconius butterflies during my second postdoc, really enjoyed it. But unfortunately, our collection of female heliconius sydno, the one in the upper left with the beautiful blue wings, got exposed to some insecticide and they all died. And we needed more females to breed the colony. They're not a protected species super much, so we could go into the forest and collect a few. And I was told, we need you to take care of the colony this morning because we need to go out to collect in the forest. Well, I want to collect in the forest. I've never been collecting butterflies in the forest. I've never seen my study organism in the wild. Well, but you can't really walk very well, so we just need you to stay behind. And this decision was being made for me by people that worked for me, which is absurd. Their view was that the fundamental task was to hike into the deep forest, chase butterflies with butterfly nets, catch the butterflies, hike back to the car. We all have to do it together. It's going to be more than an hour hiking in the deep forest. We don't think we should ask about what you actually can and can't do. We're just going to assume it. It's just better to leave you behind. But the fundamental task is actually just to catch the darn butterflies. It's not to hike. It's not to run around. It's to catch the butterflies. So we finally worked on a plan after I argued for 30 minutes about the fact that I really wanted to go. The plan was, this was a lone fieldwork thing, which I want to acknowledge is not a great idea, but it was what they came up with, and I said, I'm willing to deal with that. They dropped me off along the road, and they said they would come back 4 hours later, and they did. The butterflies come to focal plants. You can literally sit on a folding stool in front of the plant and stare, and when a butterfly comes, you can get up and scoop it out of the air with a net. You don't have to run after them. So I practiced stool and I packed plenty of water. I saw mannequins doing spacewalk displays. I saw cool hoverflies. When they got back, they were covered in chiggers and covered in mosquito bites. They'd caught 1 butterfly. I caught 2. Good thing they brought me, huh? But sometimes it goes well. We did fieldwork in Yosemite during my PhD. We got to the field site with a U-Haul truck full of plants. We needed to carry 100 plants in these big 2-gallon, 8-liter pots up a steep hill from the parking lot. I knew from my own experience, I cannot carry those pots even in a glass house. I'm going to faint and my joints are really bad and it's going to hurt. So we said, hey, what can we do instead? Well, my advisor said to me, you just planned these behavioral experiments that you were doing this spring. So you know the layout and you've already got a script for randomizing the plant orders. Why don't you, he said, plan out the experiment? And I said, great, I've got my laptop with me. And so I sat on the floor of the parking lot on the grounds with my laptop, and people came up to me and they said, this is plant so-and-so. And I said, okay, you're going to take it to patch A, location A1. The field site got set up. I got to contribute my knowledge and expertise, and I wasn't exhausted. It was perfect. This is how it should go. This is how it should be. So we exchange well-being sheets in my field study, in my group rather, before we go into the field. They ask questions that you might expect, like emergency contact information, and questions you might not expect, like, what do you need to succeed in the fields? If it's a driving day and you're the driver, do you need quiet afterwards, or do you want conversation, or do you want to go for a run? What do you need? If you're worried about fieldwork, what are you worried about? What can we do to make it a better experience? So again, asking everyone. We don't just ask me, the visibly disabled person, we ask everyone in the group. So disability in a few other difficult settings. Conferences. Conferences are a disaster. I love going to conferences. They energize me. I see colleagues. I see Chris, for example, many years running. It's so great, but they're so hard. Conferences have so many inaccessible aspects to them. So here's a short list, not that short, but you can have noisy, cramped poster sessions. Everyone complains about the poster sessions being noisy and cramped, but if you've got hearing issues, which I do, good luck hearing the presenters, or even hearing the person asking you questions when you stand. Oh, wait, I can't stand. I better request a chair. Or try to move through a poster session that's busy in a wheelchair. It's not easy. People who don't use microphones when they give talks. My voice is loud enough. I don't need to use a microphone. Well, if you have hearing issues, you need to use a microphone. Raised stages with no ramp access. I can't get onto most stages at most seminars and most conferences. I've had to lift my wheelchair onto a stage at a university before because they didn't think, even though they knew I used a wheelchair, they forgot I might need to get onto the stage, right? Dietary issues, fixed seating in sessions, no place to sit down. There are many people who can't sit on the floor for many different reasons. So providing no place to sit at a conference is not a good idea, right? Conferences are full days. They're very exhausting. I used to stay in the dorms, in the halls at conferences, and I'd, take the shuttle bus back and forth. Nowadays, I have to get a hotel that's within walking distance of the conference because I need to have a nap in the afternoon. Otherwise, I can't function. Speaking of those shuttle buses, half the time they're also inaccessible. I went to a wonderful conference event at Evolution last year, and I wheeled there because it wasn't that far from the hotel. But on the way back, I was like, this is kind of a sketchy neighborhood. I probably shouldn't wheel back on my own. And they said, oh, shuttle bus. Oh, we knew you had a wheelchair, but we forgot that you might need the shuttle bus. They found me someone to give me a lift, thankfully. But it's like, think about that, right? But especially it's the non-scheduled stuff. You're going to go out to a bar with your friends and you're going to learn about science. That's where the science happens, in scare quotes, right? You get told it's not the conference sessions, it's the social time is when the conference happens. Well, if you're disabled, that social time can be real, real hard. And the venues can even be inaccessible. Here is an example from The Guardian of our former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, long may he reign, not, who had to apologize because the Israeli energy minister could not get into the COP26 conference, the minister of energy for a country, because she uses a wheelchair. She got to the entrance and they said, this entrance isn't accessible. And she said, well, great. How do I get to one that is? And they said, oh, it's a shuttle bus. Oh, the shuttle bus isn't wheelchair accessible. She couldn't get in the door. She literally did not go to the conference that day. And he had to apologize in person to this energy minister from an allied country. So it happens to everyone. Another conference email I got earlier this year for a conference I would have loved to have gone to and did not go to for reasons that will become obvious. Dear Kelsey, I must admit we did not think about accessibility. My apologies. I have to check with the domain, which is the conference site, which was a medieval castle. And when I saw that on the website, I was like, I was pretty sure I was screwed, right? There's an elevator, but there's also some steps. This should be possible to overcome with some strong arms, which is coded language for we'll pick you up in your wheelchair and carry you up the stairs. First of all, this wheelchair weighs 50 pounds, 23 kilos, because it has power assist wheels. Second of all, that's incredibly infantilizing. And third of all, it's incredibly dangerous. Why would you even suggest that? Everyone I know who uses a wheelchair refuses to be carried for these reasons. It's not just me. Oh, the courtyard has gravel, but someone could push you across the courtyard. I hate being pushed. I am an independent person. Do not push me. I would say it's not very comfortable, but we didn't think about it. Sorry. This is a small enough community that they should have known. We're not talking a 3,000 person conference. We're talking about 150 people. So I didn't go. Meanwhile, I wrote to another small conference because I always have to write every year and ask. I can't just show up and assume it's going to be fine. And they said, yeah, it's an 1800s building, but we do have a lift installed. The toilets are not yet accessible, but we're working on it. We're really looking forward to you coming. Thank you. I'm still not sure I'm going to get there because apparently the train's questionable because disability rights are different in different countries, but I'm sure we'll figure it out. There's also disability in these informal work contexts. You have conference excursions. How many people here have ever gone on an excursion at a conference to like a botanical garden or a zoo or something? I see some nodding heads. I don't go on those because they're usually inaccessible. There are often hikes or they're a shuttle bus. Again, the shuttle bus problem, right? There's also DEI advocacy. Sometimes I've marched in Pride, for example, on behalf of my scientific society or on behalf of my university. Oh, the toilets at Pride that they put this year in London were not on a dropped curb sidewalk, so I couldn't actually get to them. Science outreach. You work at a museum or you volunteer at a museum. Can you carry your display that you're going to use while you're using a wheelchair or communicate with the children if you're deaf? Networking, everyone's favorite, right? You're going to stand around these tables because who needs to sit? Sitting is for losers. You're going to stand around these tables and you're going to chat. What if you're really socially uncomfortable? What if you're deaf? What if you can't stand? What if you don't drink? And fieldwork break days. Oh, we're going to take a break from fieldwork and then we're going to go on a hike. That is not a break, but we're going to do it. So these are all considered informal or extra work. And thus people don't consider accommodation at all because they're not mandatory. But especially if you're an early career researcher, these things truly actually are mandatory because this is how you build your networks. This is how you meet people. This is how you grow as a scientist. Communication is really critical, but it's really important that the communication doesn't always come from me. The communication needs to come from the organizers and say, does anyone have any access needs? And if so, please tell us and we will accommodate. Not, hey, I noticed it was in the castle. Do you think I can get there? In some contrast, you have to ask about access every single time because it's not an official event. But for official events, you have to ask about access every single time anyway. So you're kind of screwed either way. And I know I'm using vulgar language here, but it just kind of sucks to be excluded, right? So finally, the summary, because we're ending up on time, hopefully. I want to tell you that many barriers exist to the success of disabled folks in fieldwork and in academic research in general. But I also want to emphasize that these barriers are mostly due to perceptions and attitudes of abled colleagues and supervisors and administrators, rather than due to the disabilities themselves. It's not that I use a wheelchair that I run into problems getting into the glass house, because the glass house isn't accessible. It's not that because I have hearing issues that I have problems at poster sessions. It's because poster sessions are too darn loud, right? There are accommodations that can be made in almost all circumstances to enable success. And again, this is not universal, but we're talking 99% of the time here. Field camp in geology is a huge thing. Many of you might have heard about it. It's a ritual that you do when you study geology is you go to field camp. And field camp is 3 or 4 weeks in the field. You're hiking all over the place. You're getting fossils or you're getting sedimentary rocks or you're doing whatever. Well, you know, they're way ahead of us. They have accessible field camps for geologists now. There are wheelchair users and scooter users and service dog users and cane users and deaf folks who go on field camp and get their degrees. Why have they figured it out? We haven't figured it out. Come on, we need to get the picture, right? There are particular issues around invisibility with disability, around disclosure, and around privacy. And it's really important to consider intersectionality as well, to consider that there are multiple axes of oppression in many individuals' lives. It's very rare for people to only experience one part of oppression if they're a member of a minoritized group. So what can you actually do if you're an abled person or you're supporting a colleague who has different disabilities, etc.? Ask if someone needs help, but don't ask multiple times. You know, every once in a while, someone will come up to me while I'm pushing up a steep hill and go, can I help you? And my answer is no, I need the exercise, but thank you. And they always feel like they're being rude. And it is a little bit weird when a stranger comes up to you and offers to touch something that's part of your body, which my wheelchair is part of my body. But they are well-intentioned and they're not being that rude. But the people who don't accept you saying no, that's when it's really annoying. And do ask, don't just assume, don't grab a blind person's arm and just assume that they help getting across the intersection. Ask them first, maybe. Look out for barriers that might be impacting that person, but also ask if they want you to help with removing those barriers. It's a little weird to me when sometimes like the former director of my institute said, I saw you had issues getting through the door, so I talked to facilities and got it fixed. And I was like, wow, that's really cool, but also a little bit weird because it actually is typical door and it's not any harder than any of the other doors on the site. But look out for those barriers because it is so, so exhausting to have to advocate for yourself every time. As an ally, you can help. It is possible. Also check in occasionally to see how especially someone you're supervising is doing, if they're disabled or if they've told you about a health condition that might impact their work. Because disability is not static. I got scolded after I left a lab because I didn't tell them that my disabilities were getting worse. Because I didn't tell them I was having more problems, because apparently I needed to tell them that. And it was my fault for not disclosing all the time. Well, you know, it's really hard to have to go to your supervisor and say, I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. Or I'm sorry, but the daily walk up to the tea room is really exhausting. And I chose to walk the stairs because no one will stay with me in the lift. It's really exhausting. So check in, be the person who reaches out. Don't make the other person reach out all the time. But also build access into your plans for fieldwork, for lab work, for conferences. Make it so people don't have to do the work, right? Again, this is the whole point about burnout and fatigue. It is so exhausting to have to reach out constantly, to ask for access, to fight for access, to yell at the airline when they yet again refuse to let you carry your wheelchair on the plane. Like, build access in from the ground. And include disability in your DEI work. Even if you're like, we can't ask about it for legal reasons, understandable, but build it in so people feel welcomed. Disability is an aspect of diversity. Make sure that well-being events and signage are inclusive. My favorite was a sign, you know, that people post those posters next to elevators or lifts to say, like, please take the stairs. I'm always a little annoyed at these signs because I don't take the stairs, and in my wheelchair especially, I can't take the stairs lest it end in disaster. But there was one sign in particular that showed a person tap dancing with a cane, dancing down the stairs. Take the stairs. And I was like, I tweeted about it actually, and a colleague in the department read my tweet and was so offended on my behalf that they ripped down all of the signs, which it was wonderful, right? Someone actually saw that I was upset and helped. But why would you have a person tap dancing with a cane down the stairs? I mean, seriously. But also finally educate yourself, and this is true for other minoritized identities as well. Read about what it is like to be a member of a different identity than yours. But also don't assume that what you've read, especially Google and Wikipedia, know more about a person's lived experience written by doctors who you think would know better, but they don't, as we all know. That can't possibly be something you're experiencing because that's not typical for the disease that I've read about. I'm sorry, this is my body. I'm not lying. Hello? But the number one thing you can do is to communicate and to respect. Be open. Listen to your minoritized colleagues or your historically excluded group colleagues' lived experiences, even if they're negative experiences and they hurt to hear. But also respect when people don't want to share or talk. Hey, I heard that comment. It sounded really hard. I don't want to talk about it right now. Okay. I just wanted you to know I was thinking about you. I wanted you to know I heard that. And also treat people as the authorities on those experiences. If a person of color tells you that something racist happened to them, guess what? Something racist happened to them. It's not up to you to decide that that wasn't a racist event. If a woman tells you that they had a gender aggression, guess what? They had a gender aggression. It wasn't up to you to decide that actually it was fine. And also engage in a dialogue. Make sure the communication isn't just one way. Don't make the excluded person always have to ask to just get in the room and just be included. Reach out. So the final take-home messages, I know there are several sort of sets of take-home messages here, but Disabled folks belong in STEM. We are underrepresented in STEM. The numbers show that. It's not a meritocracy. And we are poorly accommodated in almost all cases. I have faced illegal discrimination at work and in schooling. I have faced being told my documentation is inadequate and I can't possibly get the accommodations I need because it would be unfair to someone else. This happens to all of your disabled colleagues. It's not just me. Field work is usually possible. I do field work in the field. It's great. I love it. I have to be careful, but I do it. I did fall down and break my thumb. That was very exciting. But you know what? That could happen to anybody. And it was in the risk assessment. So the admin said, yeah, okay, you put it in the risk assessment, not a problem. Communication and trust are the most important things. Discuss things honestly. Trust that a disabled person's evaluation of their needs and their abilities is the best available truth that you have. Trust that they know what they're talking about. When they say something has changed, trust that it's changed and don't go, but you could do it yesterday. Why can't you do it today? If they tell you they can't do it, guess what? That's the reality. We do exist as disabled scientists. Please do not let people tell you that there are no scientists who are disabled. I was told by an otherwise lovely colleague who was upset at the tactile paving they have on dropped curbs so that folks who are blind and use white canes can feel that there's a street coming up. Well, he said, I noticed you have problems with that with your wheelchair because it bumps you and it hurts your back. And I said, yeah, it's kind of annoying. It's what we call an access conflict. But someone who's blind needs that. He said, but there's no blind people here. There's no blind people in biology. We do actually exist. I swear. They're not mythological creatures. I'm not the griffin at the top of the entrance to campus that I loved seeing yesterday. I am a real, actual disabled scientist. Thank you. But we need more role models in senior positions. You cannot be what you cannot see. There is, in evolutionary biology, I know of one Black man who is a senior academic. And do you know how tired he gets of being the token Black academic? I am very tired of being the token disabled academic. And while I love giving these seminars, and I'm very excited to be here, there needs to be more of us. There need to be more mentors. There need to be more senior people so that I'm not waiting 12 months to get assigned a mentor in grad school who can talk to me about what it's like to be disabled in academia. And finally, the slogan that is so common in disability rights movements, nothing without us is for us if it's about us. Don't make assumptions, don't make rules, don't make situations without talking to the people who are actually affected by them. Don't assume that you know better, because that is paternalistic and it's gross and it's not right. And also, it's usually not cost effective and it doesn't get you the solution you need anyway. So thank you very much for your attention and feel free to reach out as well.